You have to switch on.
Ah, right.
Check again.
Test one.
Test one.
Test one, two. Test 1, 2.
Thanks.
Oh, here. Okay.
Test. 1, 2. Test 1, 2. 1, 2.
Will be delayed, right?
Test 1, 2.
So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Janos Tyszowski. I'm the director of the UN Information Service here in Vienna. And let me welcome you on behalf of the Information Service to this very special press briefing by Mr. Russell Brand. You know Mr. Brandt more as an actor, a comedian, a writer, and also an accomplished columnist. But today, this afternoon, he's primarily here as an advocate, as a civil society advocate on drug addiction and drug control policy issues. He's a special guest of a group of civil society NGOs and actors who are taking part here at the Vienna International Center in the 57th session of the Commission on Narcotic Drugs. Mr. Brandt has been invited here as a guest by this group of NGOs, which is in fact the International Drug Policy Consortium, which is chaired by Mike Trace, and Mike is here on board as well. Mr. Brandt has been here this afternoon visiting the Vienna International Center. He has talked to representatives of civil society groups attending the session of the Commission, and he has also had a first-hand glimpse of what it is like when it comes to the UN, working in the UN, the way the UN works as far as decision-making is concerned, working with civil society, how member states are debating, discussing issues. I believe, Russell, this is the first time that you're at a UN office?
Yes, it is. And also, I don't know who's talking now, and I'm not entirely sure that voice wasn't in my mind. Who is that was speaking? Oh, it's Janis!
Yes, it's me.
Oh, you're just there. All I needed to do was turn my head slightly and the information became obvious. What a pertinent metaphor for what is about to happen.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming to us, and it's a pleasure to host this press conference for you. So, over to you.
Go on, mate.
Thank you very much, Janos, and thank you to the United Nations Information Service for letting us use these facilities. As Janos has said, my name is Mike Trace. I'm the chairman of International Drug Policy Consortium. I'm going to chair this event and moderate, but it's Russell's show. It's bound to be Russell's show, but you will get a few words of introduction from me to put it in context. Many of you may have covered the official United Nations drug policy meeting taking place across the other side of this building. It's a 5-year review of global drug policy. And ministers were here last week to review what progress we'd made in international drug policy around the world. We are hoping this is a key stepping stone in modernising and humanising drug policies, moving away from punishment-based drug policies to health and human rights. Countries are very much diverging on their views of this. Some countries are very reform-minded. They want to move to different types of drug policies. They want to have more liberal and tolerant drug policies, but some countries want to retain what we may call repressive or punishment-based policies. But this is a start of a key process at the United Nations. There is a United Nations summit in New York in 2 years' time, where we very much hope there will be some significant steps forward in producing a more effective and humane drug policy. One key progress that we're seeing happening now is very relevant to our conference here, is that many countries have accelerated their move away from punishing drug users towards providing them with health services and care and support. And that's why that's symbolised by a campaign I'd like to draw all of your attention to, which is called the Support Don't Punish campaign. Around the world, grassroots organisations are doing their own work in their own countries to try to promote the idea that drug users are in need of support rather than punishment or imprisonment. And we have run a campaign on World Drugs Day last year, where 41 countries, grassroots activists did campaigns to show their support for that campaign. Our intention is to double that number of countries this year on June 26th, which is World Drugs Day, and I'm very proud and very pleased that Russell has agreed to give his support to that campaign. So with that, I'll pass over to Russell to say a few words. As many as you like, actually. It's yours.
Would you like them in a particular order?
No, just jumble them up.
I'm so happy to be here today at the UN. Thank you, Mike, for organising this. Thank you, Janis, for your introduction. I have never been to the UN before, and I found it quite an inspiring situation to see a municipal organisation with truly global intentions is very, very exciting. although one of my friends says that he is surprised that the building does not smell of chlorine. There is a certain atmosphere to the place, a certain atmosphere to buildings with this kind of intention. The reason I am here is both as a recovering drug addict and as an advocate for change in global drug policy and legislation. As a person that lived as a drug addict for ages and ages, I know that the criminal judicial approach to drugs does not work. It's completely ineffective. One thing, drug addicts do not care about the legal status of the drugs they are taking. Drug addicts will take drugs under any circumstances. All that the legislation around drugs can achieve is making a more punitive, negative, pejorative, damning context within which the inevitable use of drugs can take place. On a personal level, drugs, I mean, if it was up to me, if I had a magic wand, and by God I've tried to create one, what I would do is I would have it that no one required any chemical assistance to enjoy the evident beauty and glory of our planet and the wonder of humanity. However, that doesn't seem to be the situation. People do seem to need toxins, narcotics of various kinds, and as long as that is the situation, I think what we need to create is a context where that can be done as healthily, as safely, and as with little damaging consequences as possible. What are you up to down there? Look at them right at the foreground. Oi, you geezer.
Hello.
What you up to? You must be aware you've become the centre of attention. This is the kind of thing, I suppose, that happens regularly at the UN. An enclave will develop where an insular debate affects the main narrative. This cannot be allowed to happen. We must have absolute consensus. I suppose the democratic process doesn't afford that. Oi, stop it. You're becoming a problem.
They're doing the tech that gets you online.
Well, we want to be on the internet, do we? We're not content to just speak to these beautiful people that have made the effort to come.
There's a few arrived.
Well, listen, this is what I learned today from talking to people. I spoke to the fella from Portugal. What was his name, mate?
João.
I spoke to João from Portugal. He was lovely. He said that for the last 11 years, they've changed their legislation in Portugal, that HIV infection has dropped dramatically, that AIDS has dropped dramatically. I spoke to a fella from Switzerland. I didn't even know he was a policeman. Like, I spoke to him for about 15 minutes. He was a policeman. Anything could have happened. My life was in my hands there for a moment. I was there, cheek by jowl with authority. He told me that even from a conservative perspective, the penalisation and prosecution of drug addicts doesn't make any social sense. I spoke to people this morning that have told me that there isn't no real global consensus around drugs. Like, for example, in Uruguay, cannabis has been made legal, whereas in Singapore, you can get the death penalty for using cannabis. He said that he asked that geezer, what's he called? Fedorov?
Fedotov.
He asked that geezer Fedotov about the consensus. He goes, hey, how can you have it that some people are getting death penalty and some places it's completely legal and call it a consensus? He said, it's a very broad consensus.
I check it.
Mate, seriously,
Yes,
do me a favour. Honestly.
It's not working because some...
I think, look, there's microphones here. Sound is being catered for. My friend, you're going to have to change your personal priorities. Okay. Eliminate them. For the broader consensus, for the common good. Sometimes for the common good we have to put aside our own personal needs. For example, for good audio. I'm sure somewhere around this room sound is getting taken, mate. We'll pick it up somewhere. So, yeah, well, also this morning I had a really good chat. I had some people that said that they want to be able to continue to use drugs. My personal experience is that I was using drugs because I was in a great deal of spiritual, emotional and physical pain, and what I needed was a solution to those problems. And what was provided for me to reach that solution was a context of compassion and tolerance. What bigger context is there than the planet as a whole? If we can create a planetary context where drug addicts are treated as people with a health issue, not a judicial criminal issue, that will create the perfect context for us to advance. Of course, as well, there is like a human rights and freedom type issue. I suppose if people want to recreationally use drugs and it ain't harming anybody else, that's not really anybody's business. I mean, sort of broadly speaking, is it? So, but what I've also worked out that nobody at all is helped by drugs being made illegal, unless, of course, there is a conspiracy to marginalise, condemn, and persecute disenfranchised members of our global community. And I'd hate to think that that was the situation, that certain countries didn't matter, that certain classes didn't matter, that certain races didn't matter. So unless that's the situation, there's literally no reason to proceed with this experiment of prohibition, which has lasted for a century, that has done nothing but bring death, suffering, crime, create a negative economy, and deaths all over Mexico, deaths all over Malaysia, unnecessary death penalties. You'll notice I'm saying the word death a lot. So what I think we need to look at is an alternative way of thinking, an alternative approach of consciousness, and I'm very, very grateful to be a part of it. If any of you got any questions, I'm almost certain of two things. One, I will try my best to answer them, and two, I won't know the answer. I look forward to chatting to you all. Shall I sit down now, Mike? What do you think?
That would be great, yeah. So, now, I knew when I said I would chair this that would be an almost impossible task, but I think you've got an idea of Russell's views on the subject there. What I wanted to add, one thing to add, is that I've mentioned it once, but I am going to mention it again because it's my pet project here, is this Support Don't Punish campaign represents the sort of things Russell was just saying. If we could take a few minutes before we take questions, just to take a few words from somebody who's been involved in that campaign in her own country, Mauritius. Is it okay?
Shall I endorse Support Don't Punish, something I forgot to do during my oratory explosion of a few minutes ago? Support Don't Punish is a really bloody good thing. As the word suggests, support people with a health issue, don't punish them. But I endorse it and support it. Sorry, I forgot to mention it. I got carried away because it sort of seemed like an intergalactic sort of scene from a Star Wars movie. But we're going to talk to that Malaysian lady.
Let's have a few words from Natalie so you can get an insight into what Support Don't Punish is about. Just a few minutes, Natalie, and then we'll go to questions.
All the pro-drug people have got crazy hair.
So
let's get someone with normal hair to be on our fucking side.
So thank you, Mike. Thank you, Russell. So I'm Natalie Rose from CUT Mauritius, and I've been a participant in the Support Don't Punish campaign because in my organization, we don't believe that people who use drugs should be sent to jail. In my country, harsh drug policies send people to jail where they do not have access to needles, clean needles, where they do not have access to condoms. And harsh drug policies also hinders access to existing services for people who use drugs within the community. So we believe that this kind of approach is not effective, as it has rightly been mentioned by my two colleagues here. So moreover, the fact that drug law debate is non-existent in a lot of developing countries, namely from where I come from my region, African region, there is a lack of debate from the state level on the need to reform our drug laws. And we see this as a concern. So just to finish, I've been given only a couple of minutes. I would just like to mention a situation about the Crimea, as you might all be aware. With the taking over these days, people who use drugs in this part of the world are facing the probability that the health services that are being given to them are cut. For example, there are about 800 people that use methadone in Crimea, and now with the political takeover, it looks like their methadone will be cancelled. And it is important that there is a UN stand on this issue because people are being given life-saving services, and it's most probably that it's going to be cut just because of some political problems that they're having. So we think then, just to finish, that all situation with harsh drug policies and also lack of debate hinders access to services for people who use drugs and is a problem in terms of public health and also human rights. So thank you very much.
Do you want to stay up in case somebody asks you a question? Okay, questions. Normal press conference routine. Put your hands up and I'll give you the floor and tell us where you are from, your name and where you are from. So questions, please. First here, second there.
Going back to your magic wand remark that you just made, I noticed you mentioned it would be good if people could live without chemicals or toxins. Do you include cannabis, which is a plant? Do you put it like in this drug category, or do you think it's something very different from the other types of illegal drugs?
I suppose that comment was kind of about a utopian ideology, sort of unfettered from the bounds of reality and convention, mate. But what I mean broadly is, if people are going to use drugs, create a context where it's safe. Personally, I'm not interested in making distinctions of those sort of the medical and criminal implications of cannabis use. I can see a more moderate than more obvious pharmaceutical illicit drugs.
Second question there.
Sorry, I'm not an accredited journalist, but...
Get out.
But
and Faye, I should have known that, because technically we're meant to give priority to the accredited journalists.
I'd just like to ask a question about your opinions on recovery and what you mean by support, because as a recovered user, in the UK we're very good at giving people medicine and just sending them away again, but what do you think in terms of supporting people with drug problems? What do you think would be the most effective way?
For me, if people have a problem with drugs, that the intention ought to be abstinence-based recovery. I can see that harm reduction may be part of that journey, but the intention should be to live drug-free. That is what has worked for me, and that's the only thing I'm in a position to advocate. That's my definition of recovery.
Gentleman there.
Hi Russell, I'm Graham DeBarra from Students for Sensible Drug Policy Ireland. I'd like to ask you, what are the harms and benefits of abstinence-based policy and harm reduction in your opinion?
The benefit, that is a good question, mate. But the benefits of abstinence-based recovery is, I think it gives you a legitimate and genuine opportunity to address whatever problems may exist behind the initial drug use, where like social, psychological, emotional problems that are masked or temporarily addressed by drug use can't really be approached while drugs are being used. Harm reduction is obviously a lower requirement entry point, so there's an advantage there in extreme cases. For me, as I've said, Sunshine, I reckon what you want is people to be able to make a recovery available to as many people as possible, and people need, I suppose, to be able to individually select the nature of recovery that they think is appropriate for them. For me, it's living drug-free one day at a time. Other people might want some harm reduction model, but I would say with the intention of abstinence-based recovery, and some people, just want to take drugs, and if it's not a problem, it's not a problem.
Okay, do we have any questions from press representatives?
About time they piped down after Leveson.
Gentleman here.
Gregory Bondarek, Vienna International Radio. Russell, a colleague of yours, Eddie Izzard, has announced that he's going to be running in the London mayoral race. Do you have any political ambitions of your own?
I think it's difficult to put politics and ambition in the same sentence. But given that it appears to be about the maintenance of a status quo rather than any kind of advancement for our species. But if you ask me, am I interested in changing the planet, in changing consciousness, the answer is yes, I am. That was a politician answer.
Yeah, it was. Other questions? If you get no further questions, do you want to say anything else?
You can ask questions if you want. Don't be nervous about it or shy. I won't bully you. Or do you think we've entirely covered this complex issue? I will take questions on the Iranian nuclear crisis. We need to get on with these inspections. Quick, smart. We can trust the inspectors.
If anybody asks questions about the Iranian talks...
any conclusions that are reached will definitely be observed by the US.
Lady here.
It's not Ukraine, sorry. Maddie French from Central European News. Just while you're on abstinence and harm reduction topic, do you not, Russell, find it, organisations like the IDPC and many organisations that work in harm reduction, they take a different point of view to you, maybe when it comes to methadone clinics or stuff like that. Do you not ever find that is a problem with your advocacy, or do you ever find it might be a risk for you to promote your personal experience when so many others might benefit from a methadone programme?
I think people can benefit from a methadone programme as part of the journey to abstinence-based recovery. So I don't see any dispute there. My concern, mate, is has always been that methadone is a way of lifing people off, of managing and manipulating statistics and assisting the interests of pharmaceutical companies. And for me, that's a bigger problem. I just speak from my personal perspective that what I needed to do was remove drugs from the equation so I could address what I was dealing with as a problem underneath the motivating problems. So for me, I don't see any conflict there. I can see that for some people, methadone's a really, really useful tool. Myself, when I was coming off heroin, I used Subutex for a few weeks to help me deal with the problem of withdrawal and whatnot.
Okay, we have 3 people waiting. The gentleman at the back, then the gentleman over here, and I think there was a lady over here.
Was that me, Mike? Yes, you know. Right, okay, thank you. Elliot Albers from the International Network of People Who Use Drugs, based in London. I represent the global community of people who do actively use drugs. Many of us are on substitution programs. I am, in fact, myself prescribed morphine. Now, I'm very glad that you've actually conceded that for many people, harm reduction programs, opiate substitution therapy programs are a very valuable thing. Very valuable program. For many people, they're a lifeline. Now, I'm just very concerned that within much of your language around recovery, there is a serious denigration of the value that methadone programs, that harm reduction programs offer to people who choose to continue using drugs. And it's a continual stigmatization of people who active drug users, and it's a big problem in your rhetoric. It's a very difficult basis from which to come looking at decriminalizing drug use, where many of us do use drugs without problems. Some of us use harm reduction programs. So please be clear in your language around this. Thank you.
I thought I was well clear. I said, mate, if people want to take drugs, that's their lookout, that's their business. Take drugs if you want to take drugs, it's not my deal. I'm saying if people are taking drugs because they have psychological problems, mental problems, social problems, or indeed have no problems at all but would like to stop using drugs, then there is a solution to that problem. You know, for me, I don't think we should be looking for fractures and areas for dissent among our broad consensus that global drug laws need to change because thousands of people are dying. There's an illicit economy. Like, you know, we're talking to people from Mexico that are saying, like, you know, 70,000 people have died in the last sort of 7 years. We don't need to quibble about, like, the lexicon with which we describe different aspects of the same problem. We all want a solution. Like, I'm not standing here saying people that use drugs should be coshed and lifed off. Let people do what they want. I'm a person who's like, I'm into personal freedom. If it's not a problem, then it's not a problem. But where I have a constituency and where I have personal experience is people that are using drugs to deal with emotional, spiritual, personal issues. And those are the people that I can most clearly represent. Of course, I'm interested in your personal human rights the same way as I'm interested in everybody's personal human rights and their right to pursue happiness in whatever wacky, crazy way they want to, as long as it don't harm nobody else, you know? But for me, the bigger problem is like the serious issue, mate, is people are getting like butchered left and right all over Mexico. People are getting hung in Pakistan and all over Malaysia for something that's not a moral issue. It's not a moral issue. It's a health issue. We got to focus on that. We can't get caught up in infighting, mate, and getting all that Judean People's Front bullshit.
Okay, time is such that we have time for 2 more questions. The gentleman at the back here and the lady at the back there have been waiting.
Is that me? Donald McPherson with the Canadian Drug Policy News. And Vancouver, from Vancouver, Canada. Vancouver, Canada had a serious public health disaster during the 90s with an overdose crisis, an injection drug use crisis, and an epidemic of HIV among injection drug users. And one of the responses to putting in place a comprehensive approach, health-based approach, was implementation of North America's first supervised injection room. And I noticed in the past year you visited that, and I was wondering if you could say a few words about your visit there.
I've got nothing but respect for Liz Evans and the Insight programme which you're speaking, which is a harm reduction programme. She's provided like safe places for people to use intravenous drugs and also gave them access to recovery. She described it as a low entry point model where like that was accessible to everyone. I believe there's some cooked up hocus pocus financial indiscrepancy being investigated as part of what I would glibly describe as a global conspiracy to criminalise anyone that wants to make a social advance in the area of addiction and drug using. And now Liz has lost her job and the facility has been taken over by the government, which I would imagine probably the first step of annihilating the facility. I see the work that they did there. I can see why it would be a threat to a Conservative government. They were interested in social enterprise. They were interested in inclusion. They were interested in compassion and tolerance and helping people with a problem to get better. And if it, as our man here, who's one of the most motivated drug addicts I've ever met, keeps continually saying, if people want to just use drugs safely, then, let them. So, I can see that that's a threat to the core values of a society that needs continually to have scapegoats to persecute and prosecute and judge to, to sort of galvanise voters in a broad neoliberal consensus. Okay. She was wicked, that Liz Evans. I totally support her. I wish I could do some more for her.
Okay, and the final question, I think it was a lady over to the left here.
Hi, my name is Lisa Campbell. I'm also from Canada, Canadian Students for Sensible Drug Policy. We really appreciate your support of Insight. I just want to ask you about your opinion on cannabis legalization and if we should take a similar approach to legalize and regulate other drugs.
Yes. I completely agree with the legalization of cannabis, and I think we should legalize and regulate all other drugs. That's what I think should happen globally as quickly as possible. Shouldn't wait for 2 years, just get on, do it now. I mean, I don't know how you push these things through. I'm sure there's some paperwork, is there?
Okay, I think that I'm safe in saying that's the first time we've heard that in these rooms. Okay, so the end of the okay, we will take one more question because a very esteemed colleague has pointed me that way. Sir, you have a very short question.
Yeah, Jim Cleary from the University of Wisconsin. Some 6 billion people are without simple pain relief because of the collateral damage of the war on drugs. Could you comment, Russell?
Another serious consequence of this war on drugs. How can you have a war on an inanimate object? All these wars on things that aren't real have got to stop. Wars on terror, wars on drugs. Of course people need access to pain relief. I realise it creates international complications with getting pharmaceutical aid across borders because of this ridiculous war on drugs stance. Yeah, you highlight a very, very important issue, and that's another of the problems that could be eradicated by reviewing this global stance on drugs and adapting a stance of tolerance, compassion, and not just bloody humanitarian values that I think we all agree with anyway. I think we all agree within ourselves, don't we? We already know the answer. Knowledge is acting on wisdom. I don't know why we're pretending that we don't know what to do. It's like a bizarre facade. It's peculiar that we would do this as human beings. Why are we? It's confusing, Mike.
Okay. On that suitable note, to end the organised thing, why are we doing this as human beings? We can all go away and ponder that. The one thing we actually, the question that came is actually quite apposite because as I said at the start of this event, we are on the start of a journey for 2 years to the UN summit in New York. And one of the things we can make a massive difference to is the availability of essential pain-killing medicines to people around the world. There's a lot of political support for this. There's a lot of possibility to improve it. And it's something we should be ambitious about over the next 2 years. Only one of the things. So with that, we'll end the group end of the press conference. Thanks very much to Russell and to Natalie. There is a very short time for one-to-one interviews. Is it? If you are still...
Yeah, I'll do a one-to-one interview. Okay. Who's he going to be with? That bloody mysterious fella up the back there, no doubt.
We'll be...
in a cannabis cafe, I shouldn't wonder.
We'll do it over this side, but I have to say...
I want to do it in the UN hairdressers. Why is there a UN hairdressers? I'm going to the UN hairdressers.
The access to Russell over the next 20 minutes comes through Inez here. If Inez doesn't say you can have access, you don't have access. So you have to request to Inez.
It was very different 10 years ago.
To Russell. Okay, over this side. Yeah.
Right, mate.